once around the park, James, and don't spare the horses.
It's showtime.
Indeed it is. Here we go. It's showtime, and we record this program on the Ledger Ontario Politics Podcast on the morning of December the 18th. We are a week away from Christmas, only 7 more sleeps, and yet there it's all done but the crying. And I don't know. I'm what concerns me most is here I am a week out from Christmas, and I think I'm organized. That's the worry. I've either really missed something or as Keith Leslie pointed out a little earlier before we got on the air, I'm just going to go out and spend way too much money on shit I don't need. So here we go. All right, it is the final program of the season. So let's get to it. Lots to talk about. Keith Leslie is here, political analyst. You hear and see him on CHTV. Former Premier of Ontario, Kathleen Wynne. John Wright is here. He is the CEO at Canada Pulse Insights. And Tim Hudak, partner at Council Public Affairs and the former leader of the Ontario Conservative Party. Just a kind of a go-round last week. You know, we always say when you're listening to this, things may change by the time you get to it because we recorded. Where we left off last week, Keith, was the government was going to be back, the Tuesday after Family Day. Steve Clark said they did such a good job in the fall that they needed to spend extra time implementing all of the good work that they did in the short session this fall. So they've extended the stay away from the legislature for 102 days. For me, just the visceral reaction I got from most people was, what the hell?
Yes. Most people wouldn't, had they even been sitting 5 minutes. I mean, they had a 19-week summer break, now a 14-week Christmas break. Extended, again, traditionally, you come back after Family Day, mid-February. We're blown past St. Patrick's Day here. This is a government that clearly did not want to keep taking it on the chin daily, every day in question period from the opposition. Both the NDP and the Liberals were hammering them every day on the Skills Development Fund and the way the money was awarded to low-ranking applicants versus high-ranking applicants, got nothing. All that scandal has been just every day. And you open with Merritt Stiles doing her toot-toot about the gravy train still being going. This was hurting the government. She was calling them corrupt outside the legislature, let alone inside in question period every day. So this is something the government just didn't want to take every day. I mean, they had built up this very short fall session and had, scheduled all these night sittings, but they ended up taking away, none of the night sittings happened. And they ended up taking away most of the committee hearings. Most bills had like a 2-hour debate and then they were voted on. They really took away a lot of public input during this session. And they just didn't want to hear from opponents to their plans. So this is why they're running away from the legislature until almost the very end of March. I think it's the 23rd. That's really crazy, especially after I say a 19-week summer break and a 14-week Christmas break. When are you actually? There's a lot of work done outside the legislature. I don't mean there isn't. But what we're going to see here is Doug Ford front and center without the opposition leaders getting any say, really. The media won't pay much attention to them at all. The premier will be out there making his announcements, and the opposition might be able to get a comments lower down, but he'll be able to make his announcements, and his cabinet ministers will be out there making announcements with no accountability in the legislature.
Yeah, it's interesting that you should say that, and we'll get to some of the announcements that we've heard this week in a few minutes. But Tim, it's almost as if when the legislature is not sitting, the Ford government has made an art out of being in campaign mode, even when there isn't a campaign. They're able to sort of be out there pushing buttons, so on the other hand, where people are responding with "what the hell," there's clearly a strategy behind this in the corner office.
And that continues, right? The House has recessed, as Keith just outlined, but even, in the week up to Christmas, there continues to be a message, from the Premier or a key cabinet minister per day. Here's the problem, though. Having been the leader of the official opposition, is tactics that a particular government uses to limit the role of the opposition tend to come around and bite you down the road when you're in the opposition. And I've seen that over the years from all parties in terms of your ability to ask questions, to have written questions, number of days sitting. It is healthy for our democracy, no matter what party's in power, to have them in the spotlight, whether that's the media, whether that's daily question period and ability of the opposition members to drive a message, put a new idea on the table, or shine the light on something that looks untowards. So I get it strategically. I get the tactics that are rolling out, but ultimately, the more you handcuff the opposition, the weaker our democracy, and then you end up being handcuffed when you're on that side of the house.
Yeah, Kathleen Wynne, that we sort of touched on that last week in terms of it diminishing not just the authority but the integrity of the Legislative Assembly in general, where it's severely diminished in the eyes of the public.
Well, yeah, when you say, well, we don't even need to sit and we can run government, it makes it questionable what the value of the legislature is in the mind of the public. I think it's interesting that this break is going to really eat up all of the pre-budget discussion time. Yes, I'm sure there will be committee and there will be discussion in committee, but that does not get the same kind of profile as questions in the legislature, as Tim has outlined. So I think maybe the government is planning to have a late budget. I think they have done that in the past, and that's, every government has different timing on their budgets. But what we know is by the end of March, school boards, for example, need to know what their operating dollars are going to be. And March 31st has tended to be the target date to get your budget done. So, my guess is that there won't be a lot of pre-budget discussion, and that's a shame. So the general point that Tim is making about the health of the democracy is absolutely an issue. But I think the specifics in this timing is, we need to know what the budget's going to say. We're in really tough economic times. We're seeing the job losses and the challenges that people are confronting, particularly in the auto sector. We need to know what this government's plan is for dealing with all those issues, and presumably some of that would be in the budget, which we won't have a chance to discuss until it's just about upon us.
Well, John, does this not more or less normalize this sort of cycle, though? I mean, considering the way it's gone over the last number of years, even, we talk about it being normal to come back after Family Day. That seems like an excessively long stretch to me anyway. But but historically, we just seem to be willing to push these out further and further with little or no pushback.
Well, a lot of it has to do with the political circumstance at the time, right? I mean, the government has just gone through a fire hose of criticism on the skills funding issue. And so they want to stay out of the legislature as much as they can. Secondly, when you take a look at the polling numbers, specifically through that lens, they're not doing too badly at all. I mean, if you took the difference between the high end of the polling and the lower end of the polling, they're sitting somewhere between 45 and 51%, which is higher than what they got during the election period. They have a lame Liberal Party, which is sitting at roughly where they were, and the NDP, despite the fact that they've hearkened on some numbers and some issues with respect to the Skills Development Fund and some of the other things that really haven't made up a whole lot of ground there. So they don't really have a real concern. There isn't an election for years to come. And as a result, they can get away with this, or they can do what they wish, and they can maybe shuffle the cabinet before they get back and have enough time for, ministers to grasp their portfolio. The one thing in the numbers that we have to keep in mind, though, is that Doug Fort's personal numbers are down from where he was, which is not a surprise because he was at huge numbers, personal numbers, as were almost all the premiers right after Donald Trump said that he would take the country from us. I mean, he was sitting at 52%. He's now down to 34%, which is a bit lower than he was in the last parliament. But he's also out creating a series of issues and showing a lot of face time. And as I go on the record last time, I think it's important for leaders to kind of take a break. And I think it's important that the government just kind of settle down from a tactical point of view. So while I could agree with my colleagues that democracy needs to be, enhanced in as many ways as possible, and there should be engagement, especially for the parties themselves, from a tactical point of view in the government, they have no consequence at the moment. They have to be careful about the premier's own stature, which is now second last ranked in the entire country and flirting with where Mr. Legault is in Quebec. I think he needs some branding attention going into the new year and to reset. But right now, I don't think the government's hurting at the moment from any of this punting it down the road for the next session.
Well, we've all kind of touched on the Skills Development Fund, and that's sort of been the sticky issue, Keith, over the last 3 months or so. And, based on what we've all just said and we heard from John in terms of, strategically, tactically where the government is, that's one thing, and whether or not this is going to stick to anybody. But the story that really struck me this week was the Trillium's reporting on the Keel having been under the OPP investigation based on the audits that were done. They pulled the pin on the mental health support services that they were providing almost immediately. There's no reaction from the government on that, and I would hazard to say that they can't do anything about it because, if the OPP is involved, the OPP is involved, they can't give money. But that, to me, is the real tragedy in the story. It's not about the scandal anymore. There are a lot of people who were left hanging as a result of what went on there, and those funds being withdrawn. And now, here we go. And Christmas often is the time where, if you've got mental health challenges, Christmas can be one of the most difficult times of the year.
These are people who are often referred to as clients, but they're patients.
Mm-hmm.
And they've just basically been cut off mid-treatment for an awful lot of them. I have a friend who does this sort of counseling in person, and some have now done it on Zoom calls, of course, because that's how some people prefer to have it these days. But there is a real mental health crisis going on in Ontario, and to have the funding cut out, as you say, the government can't keep giving funding to a corporation that's under investigation by the OPP because of a faulty audit or an audit that raised a lot of issues. But we can't also just leave patients cut midstream. It's just so, it seems so inhuman. I don't think anyone actually thought of the consequences of that immediately in government. They just, we got to stop giving them money. The police are investigating this. But the people caught in the middle of this, the people that need support, and as you rightly point out, Dave, the next 7 days up to Christmas and even beyond can be really, really difficult for a lot of people facing mental challenges. They need some support, and to have that support literally just cut off overnight would be a shock to some and damaging to many, I would think. It's going to hurt some people. They're going to have to turn somewhere else to reach out, and they probably can't afford to do that. They probably can't get booking times. We all know what it's like, especially if there's insurance companies involved. Appointment with any sort of provider before the end of the year when your entitlements are going to run out. So I think it's a really disastrous unintended consequence of cutting the money off from this company to leave these patients just dangling in midair without some backup or at least some lineup. Here's some other consultations or some guidance we can get for you.
Yeah, Kathleen, it would be easy to look at that and say, see what you did. And but I would hazard to say it might not be the smartest thing to weaponize this in terms of a political strategy.
Absolutely. But, so much of the time, and I don't know, it's the end of the year, so it's a time for reflection, but we've been talking about political issues all year. We will again. We rarely talk about the impacts on individuals of these stories, like what actually happens when government makes a bad decision or there's bad process. Who gets hurt? Not the people sitting in the legislature, not the people sitting in government, not even the people sitting, in this business in the CEO's chair, but the people who are served by these organizations. And, it's a conundrum because the government's not going to step in and bail out a company that's clearly under scrutiny at the moment. But if the process had been better, then either these people wouldn't have been in the process of getting the service, but certainly it wouldn't have been cut off. So I think it's a bit of a cautionary tale in terms of the way we all talk about these policy issues, because real people are affected by these decisions. And it always makes me a bit nuts when people say, well, governments are all the same and, it doesn't matter what they do. It does matter what governments do. It really matters what policies are put in place, and it matters how those policies are implemented. And this is a perfect example of that.
We talked about the ministers making their tour outside the legislature already and big announcements. The week kicked off, Tim, in your old stomping grounds in Niagara Falls, and the premier there with the mayor and all the local officials talking about what sounds like more than a refresh, a relaunch, maybe a rebrand for Niagara Falls, but billions of dollars being promised there for new attractions, casinos. There's an observation wheel. I'm not quite sure why we're not calling it a Ferris wheel, but on the surface of it, I was talking to the guys at CKTB and locally down, in the Niagara region, they're quite pleased with it. But at the same time, I heard criticisms right away. Boy, we could really use a high performance hospital in the region before we need another casino.
There is one going up, like in Niagara South, and there's a new one, newish, in Niagara North. Look, this is exciting news. I mean, this is exciting news as a Niagaran. This is exciting news for the province of Ontario. The couple challenges that the Premier and the Tourism Minister Stan Cho are addressing here, and Sam Osterhoff as the local rep really pushing for this as well. I'm sure Wayne Gates is quite excited about it for his city. The big issue, Dave, is that often people go to the falls, but they don't extend their stay. They'll check out the falls maybe one night, and then they're gone. So, perennial question: how do you extend stays? The second one is a connect really between Toronto and Niagara Falls. There are two great tourism areas. How to get folks to enjoy both, and the province is addressing this, I think, in very significant ways. Not only expanding the attractions, I'll get to the Ferris wheel momentarily. Looking at can we actually increase the number of casinos there to make it more of a destination as well, something called the Las Vegas North, and a very important investment in infrastructure in the airport that's Niagara Lake. It's a limited airport. It is convenient. When I was CEO of the Ontario Real Estate Association, we hosted some events in Niagara Falls, and trying to get folks across Canada to the falls, it was harder to fly. Some went into Buffalo, some flew to Toronto, and then had to commute down. So the proposal to extend the runway to allow more flights there, plus an expansion of GO, that's all very good news. We all have our infatuations in politics. Maybe I talk about booze too much, particularly whiskey and Niagara wine. Premier Ford loves Ferris wheels. There is one there currently. I've been on it with a girl. It's a beautiful, beautiful view. Encourage folks to visit it. So I guess this is going to be like a really big Ferris wheel. But I think that's a bit of a side point. To make that kind of infrastructure investment, look at regulatory barriers, I think this is a very strong investment, not just in the region, but the province's tourism potential as well.
But I just want to stay with you on this for a minute, Tim, because I heard the mayor talking about this in Niagara and, admitting that there is a more or less of and I call it a branding issue, I think, for Niagara Falls, in as much as the falls themselves, one of the wonders of the world, attracts people. But he says historically, the image of Niagara Falls has not been good enough or strong enough to allow people to consider staying or coming back. Because once I've seen the falls, I've seen the falls. So there's a bit of a reset here that has to happen he made it sound like at a very grassroots level.
Yeah, Mayor Diodati has been a really strong champion. He's been a partner of the province in this. I think he has a good point, right? You want to make sure that when people come, that they're going to tell their friends about it and they're going to return. So I think there's a great opportunity for partnerships with Niagara College, for example, around hospitality, moving the quality up over time. Marine Land, right, had been a long time anchor in the area. Tastes have changed. Its attendance went down, and now it's closed. That is a massive site that could be available for a more modern amusement park plus housing. I'm really pumped about this, and you always will try to get the Premier to pay attention to your area in competition with others. To see these long-standing issues being addressed in a comprehensive fashion, Dave, makes me very excited, and it's great for folks back home.
John, I was talking to Gene Velitis earlier this week at CKTB, and he was saying, the infrastructure is key to all of this, and that's what's important. And he was worried, though, that we're going to get bogged down in road construction and everything else. I said, if you want sort of a positive in terms of experience we had here in Toronto, at least, we had all of the chaos as a result of the construction on the Gardiner, but we did get it done sooner than expected. So this may well be within reach in Niagara if, in fact, they're going to take on, because there's going to be a whole lot of work have to be done all at the same time.
Sure. There's a lot of positive stuff here, especially with the airport. I think that's critical. And it comes at a time when all levels of government are willing to invest in local areas because of what's happened with tourism going south of the border, now staying here, interprovincial trade barriers following, trying to attract domestic consumption. There's all of these conditions that are here. And it's a lot like what's happened with, as Tim references, on the Canadian wine side. You know, when you're not having access to the American wine, you drink Canadian wine. And there's been a boom in a whole series of areas that deal with that. So I think on the whole, it is a really good thing for the region, but it is a gamble. I mean, the one thing that goes with being Las Vegas of the United States, which does not kind of jive with Las Vegas of Canada, is weather. I mean, you stay a week in Vegas because you're at a property where you can not just go and gamble, but you can drive, you know, out to the Grand Canyon. It's you know, really warm. It's inviting. It's a great place to be. Whereas it's limited in Niagara, that's for sure. It's you know, go there in December, it might be beautiful, but you don't stay for a long period of time. So that's the issue that you have to grapple with here. Number one, it's great for local infrastructure. It will cost some construction to go on, but Niagara Falls needs a refresh. Number two, it does have now the proposal for an airport, which will take people down there from outside of the area to get over across the border and to maybe see a football game, right, Tim? And there's other things that are going to be attracted to the region with this sort of construction. But to try and turn it into Las Vegas of the North, the one thing you're missing is sunshine. So they've got to actually look beyond that in order for it to work.
Yeah, and I think that's at the heart of the brand in terms of what you would expect from the city, from the region, and from the sites and the attractions that you're going to attend. So you're right. You can't just kind of paint it with the same brush as Las Vegas. It's funny, though, for all of the positivity around this, Kathleen, there was already almost immediately, though, people, you know, in Niagara on the Lake saying we don't want whatever because it's going to upset the this and then that and the unique little feeling and the quaintness of whatever. So you're going to have to kind of get over that in a hurry. Otherwise, you know how easily things can get bogged down in the tyranny of the minority.
So two things on this. Quaint is never going to be the brand of Niagara Falls.
True that.
Hear that.
And I heard one Deb Hutton talking about this on the when it was first announced. And no, I really take her point. I think investing in Niagara Falls, you know, and following the lead of cheerleader Mayor Jim Diodati, who is, you know, the most enthusiastic mayor on the planet. You know, I think that we need to do this. Two things I'm worried about. One is the actual business case for casinos. And, you know, maybe, I mean, John, you introduced the notion of the weather. But I know that when we were looking at the whole horse racing industry, and Tim, you will remember this, and Keith, you will remember all the permutations and calculations that were being made about the horse racing industry and how to make it, you know, how to make it viable and so on. When we looked at the casino business, it's not a great business in terms of this moment in time. And so to expand the footprint of casinos in Ontario, I don't know. I hope there's a business case there. I worry about that a little bit. On the rebrand, to go back to Deb, you know, she was talking about going into a restaurant and having a great experience, and that doesn't happen as much. The great experience is where you come away and you think, I want to come back here. It is what it is. It's not Niagara on the Lake. It's not quaint, you know, candy shops and ice cream on a quaint little 150-year-old street, but it can be something else. And so that brand, I think, you know, it's got to be clear what that is, and it's got to be excellent at what it is. So I hope that's what can happen, because the falls should be enhanced. You know, we should want to go back and back. It is such an amazing place. And so I really hope that this is successful.
Yeah, Keith, the emphasis on the casinos, I thought also was a little odd, in as much as, you know, again, what's the experience? And I don't know about the rest of you, but I wouldn't bother going to the casino because it's just not my thing. But would I go to a great restaurant with a, you know, high-end chef and just have that kind of experience? For sure. Would I go to see theater? Sure, I would. So I think there needs to be a real 360 view of how this is going to work all together, as opposed to at the exclusion of something else.
Well, if it's really going to rely on casinos as the major repackage here, it's going to have to be casinos that provide Las Vegas level entertainment.
Right.
Not just the restaurants, the draws, and what I see at Casino Niagara now. I mean, they do get some good acts in. I'd leave from Toronto to go watch some of those concerts if I was still in the area, but it's going to have to be higher than that. And I don't know that there's enough ability to attract that level of talent. Getting the casinos in. I mean, Premier Wynne's point about the business case for casinos. I mean, as we remember with the horse racing, it was basically putting the slot machines in that could save the horse tracks. And I think for most of the casinos, it really ends up being big slot machine rooms that get most of the income and take most of it from the poorer people. So I'm not so sure that Vegas North with a whole bunch of casinos is the way to go, but something absolutely needs to be done. And this is at least a plan. And it's a clear plan. I mean, improving the airport, nothing wrong with that. It absolutely needs to be done. I still am old enough to remember when Niagara Falls was referred to as the honeymoon capital. Yeah. And that meant, of course, if you went in the winter, it was fine. They were going to stay in the room anyway. They didn't need outside attractions, apparently. Those days are gone. And I don't think it's a Ferris wheel. I think it's a concept. I know Premier Ford loves Ferris wheels, but I think it's the London Eye concept, right, where you get a big pod of people that go up and around, and it's much, much higher. And I think that would, again, be a big attraction. It would absolutely draw people. And the concerns about people in Niagara on the Lake is that they won't be able to get $500 a night for their hotel room. So to heck with them. I mean, they're never going to be. They can be all the quaint they want to be, but they're damned expensive quaint. Let's see what we can do to bring in.
Precious, very precious.
Yes, exactly.
The cost of quaint.
The old romantic there, the old romantic. Can I tell a quick story here, Dave? So appreciate the Premier talked this, and Deb got me in trouble, I think, on the radio talking about her views on the hospitality. But it is a long-standing tradition, right? When there's a journey behind the falls, which originally started by you could actually go behind the falls for free, and then they charge you to get out from behind the falls.
That's like Prince Edward Island. They charge you to get out.
And another one. This is I think late 1800s. There's a significant recession, and so one of the tourism ideas they came up with, I think there's like 4 hotels at the time, was to actually get a boat, and they turned into a pirate ship. I guess pirate ships are very much in vogue, and they put a bunch of animals on the ship that you could see beforehand, and then they set the ship to go over the falls with the animals on board, and they tried to figure out if some of the Canadian geese actually survived. The rest of the animals did not, except for Dave Trafford, one bear that was on board and broke out of his shackles, jumped off the boat, and swam to shore to attack the tourists for watching. So it's a long history.
So is that the roots of Marineland then, Tim?
Oh God!
Oh man! But there is a long-standing history there, and I think we know that.
Yeah, indeed.
Things just don't cut it anymore.
Well, I'll be curious to see how quickly it goes, because again, listening to the mayor, this isn't something that was just kind of, on the back of a napkin. They've been talking about this for some time in terms of preparations, and so it'll be critical in terms of, moving this forward with everything else that's going on, the focus on infrastructure, certainly on tourism, just generally in this country. And with that, of course, when the Premier's making his announcement, made it fairly clear this week that he is not going to Florida anytime soon.
It's going to be the first time I'm not going to Florida. But I talked to so many people. Don't let this guy, Trump, determine and ruin your life and everything. That's my personal choice. Maybe some families have gone to Florida their whole lives. Go to Florida. That's great. But I encourage you to stay here and support local tourism. But you can't let the one tyrant change your lives, right? You just can't let it happen. I'm doing it out of my own personal choice because I just can't do it. But don't let this guy change your lives. If you go down and you see, maybe their grandparents are down there, maybe they're somewhere else. So we'll get through this, but they're hurting down there right now.
They're hurting down there right now, and he was referring to just generally speaking the United States, but certainly Governor DeSantis took issue with it and posted it on Twitter to say, we're doing just fine. Florida breaks its own record again for 34.4 million visitors in the second quarter of 2025. I did a little bit of digging. You didn't have to dig very far to find out that the majority of the tourism in Florida, John, is domestic. So, you know, the drop in Canadian tourism is going to take a bite, and it's symbolic. But
you gotta really dig on that. Can you imagine a politician putting a number up that might be questionable?
yeah, really.
I mean, if you start to dig into it, yes, domestic tourism in Florida holds, but what what the Florida state did was pivot and head to Europe with their advertising dollars. So they're up 11% from Europe during that quarter. They also had an outreach campaign to Brazil, so they brought in people there. And so when you look at the year, overall, it's flat. They've taken and replaced the Canadians for a period of time and made it flat. But the second quarter was highest, and that was because the Canadians weren't there and they brought in a whole bunch of other people. The real test is not the fact that we've got close to 14, 15% down going across to Florida during the regular year, but on the average. But if you look into the first quarter, that's when the snowbirds are there. That is down last year 20 to 25%. The question is whether or not it's even going to be higher now. So they may be getting Europe on in the second quarter, but they're not still getting Canadians. You look at Vegas. I as most of you know, I mean, I'm in a family where I've got Formula One fanatics here. And so we went to the first evening run of Formula One in Vegas 3 years ago, and with a lot of Canadians. So that was 365,000 people ended up in Vegas for that event. The next year, it was down to 360,000 for its second event. So, it lost its novelty. And you would expect that third year, this year, 180,000. So that's almost 50% less. All the Canadians basically stayed away. Their tourism is down 33 to 40%. They've lost $5 billion. Hey, look at Niagara Falls. And so, you have to put this in a relative context. So, I mean, Governor DeSantis is going to try and make good that this is great for them and good on them from pivoting, just like Canada's pivoting elsewhere. But it'll be the first quarter of this coming year where everybody takes a look and sees whether or not, the Canadians are going to be there, because they're certainly not in the eastern coast. They're certainly not in the western coast. They're not in the middle part. But again, what the Premier said, I thought was prudent. It's kind of like, he's going to take the example and stay home. I know now people are not going to, like, anecdotally, people are not going to the States, not because of Mr. Trump, but from what they see from ICE. I mean, that is a branding issue for that country that's going to be long-standing, and people don't want to go down there for that or being stopped at the border. So, I mean, Canadians are finding other things to do, but the Premier is probably prudent, saying if you got grandparents down there or other people, go and visit them. But it's up to you and what you want to make in terms of a personal decision.
Well, oddly enough, on this, Tim, it's almost as if the Premier's following the crowd as opposed to leading the crowd, because over the last number of months, before he even mentioned this, the people in my circle are saying, I'm not going. And normally we would go to visit so-and-so, or we would do a weekend in New York, or, just last night had our Christmas party with the hockey guys, and we were talking about doing a tournament, and they said, well, where's the tournament? And it was in Niagara, New York. Well, half the guys in the room said, we're not going. I'm not going. And normally they would travel, right? Yeah. So there's an underlying sense here among Canadians that this is my way of saying, bugger off. I'm not going to bother with ICE. I'm not going to bother with Trump. I'm not going to bother with 5 years of history in my social media. All those things are really kind of piling up, and I'm going to look elsewhere, whether it's Mexico or Canada or Europe. But I'm going to find some other way to spend my time and money.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think there's a secondary impact. There's a stigma as well that, well, what are my neighbors or, my fellow panelists going to say if they find out I went to the States? I have a couple of friends that are going to the States with family, right? Long time, Disney trip and stuff like that. And that's fine, but they don't tell anybody. So the names will not be on the Ledge podcast of who are daring to go visit Mickey Mouse in this political climate.
Well, it won't be crowded.
Pardon me?
It won't be crowded.
There you go. But to your point, I don't think it's the Premier following public opinion. I think this is his genuine reaction. I know this from him. I remember talking to him, while he's in Florida. It's been a special place for his family and a special place, for his kids. He's a fondness for Americans, with the exception of the Orange Man in the White House. So I think this is his from the gut, genuine reaction. And what I appreciate, because there's a sort of a common sense tone that the Premier can hit very effectively. And he's not judging, he's not lecturing, but he's giving his own example here. And I just think it's true and genuine. I forgot one point on the tourism in Niagara Falls, by the way. One of the reasons this is here is very much one of those files that's been anointed by the Premier. I know from talking to the current tourism minister and previous ones, there was a big push by the Premier, and eventually got fed up with the existing casinos, protecting their monopoly, and said, let's just make this happen.
Yeah, well, and I didn't mean to suggest that the Premier was sort of following the polls on this, Keith. What I'm suggesting is that I heard this way out before the Premier actually stood up. And so he is actually articulating what I'm hearing just generally among Canadians.
Well, the question that was put to him by CHCH producer Randy Rath was, there's been an organic boycott, basically, amongst Canadians traveling to the United States. And that was the premise of the question put to the Premier. That's when he said, well, I'm personally not going to go. But again, I thought, and I agree with Tim completely, he was bang on by saying, if it's your tradition, if you have a condo in Florida, the grandparents are there, you have a family tradition of doing that, do what you feel you're comfortable with. And, go see them if that's what you do every year. Go to Disneyland if you've already booked that trip. But for the most part, I don't think we need to be afraid of naming names and saying who's going to the United States. You don't have to justify your travel to these places. I think that's a bit extreme. I think that's where, they talk about the left cancel culture and all that crap. I think that falls right into that category. It's a personal decision. There may be all sorts of reasons for it. But I did note, and to John's point about the Vegas tourism, the Air Canada passengers into Vegas are down 33%. That's a huge, huge hit. So they might be making up some domestically and advertising in Europe and, South America, but the Canadians aren't coming. And I think that's a huge, huge issue for them. And again, as much as it's Trump, I agree. It's ICE. Give me 5 years of your social media accounts. Now, whether they're willing to watch all these back episodes of On the Ledge, I'm not sure. But there might be a few of my tweets. I don't know I don't think I went crazy, but who knows? And who knows where the judgment line is there? And do they really have time to do that? I mean, how is this going to actually work just practically? I don't see how it works, but it does, I think, give Canadians a chance to just say, you know what? Let's put our vacation money somewhere else this year.
Well, I guess it gets at what we have been talking about for almost a year now, Kathleen, and that is this cultural reset in our relationship with the Americans, whether it's, visiting, whether it's how we do business, whether it's expectations around what we can expect from Americans, our, security and so on. So it's a small part of it, but it's one of those kitchen table decisions that really kind of punctuates, I think, the situation.
Yeah, and I think it's it makes people sad. It makes me sad. I have a sister in Boston, and my other sister and I have gone down in the past, and every time I thought about doing it this year, I just thought I'm not sure I want to do it. And certainly for Jane and me to travel, it's going Back to the Future, because when Jane and I were first together in the early 90s, when we would go through an airport, we never went through the same line. We always went through separate lines. We didn't let on that we were a family, because we just didn't want the hassle. We're from a generation where women would be turned back at the border if they were going to the Michigan Women's Music Festival, and we're back in that time now. I'm not going to go across the border as Jane's spouse. We would go in separate lines, and so there's a risk factor that I'm just not interested in dealing with. But I thought the Premier's I thought his press conference or his answer was kind of a masterclass in playing both sides of the fence, which is what he has to do, because there are people who need to go for family reasons. There are people who want to go, and that's up to them. But he's leading by example. So I thought he did what he needed to do.
So all the conversation last week was, why aren't you selling off the $80 million worth of U.S. booze and so on? And in terms of, and it sounded like the government was equivocating, John. But I thought that the Premier's answer on that, in terms of why they don't do this, was actually a pretty good answer in context.
Yeah, but it's not as easy as it sounds. We just can't sell it off. And I'm not going to do that during Christmas holidays, when it will hurt our wineries, it will hurt our distilleries, and it's just not going to happen. I want to support local jobs and opportunities here. But if we find a buyer maybe in another province, that'd be different. But folks, keep in mind, people are coming up with all these wild ideas. I've never seen people so interested in liquor. But guys, this is the LCBO's money. It's no one else's. In return, it's Ontario's money. So it's the taxpayers' money that own LCBO. And if we can get rid of it out of province somewhere, we will. But I'm not going to hurt the wineries here or the distilleries or anyone else. So go out there, buy Ontario booze, no matter if it's wine, whiskey, vodka, whatever is made here, and support the local industry.
That's a good, I think, actually, for me, that was, that's not a bad answer. John?
On both counts during that press conference, I mean, he's on message, right? Like, I mean, he's balanced, he's relaxed, he's not got Crown Royal that he's pouring into the toilet. He hasn't, he's not making all kinds of cutting remarks about other things. He is acting as a premier should, and I think that's what you take away from that. I mean, I guess on reflection, I just want to say that, I mean, it's been a tough year all the way around, but what we're not talking about is where people's heads are at the end of this year. I mean, we face in this country a monumental task going into next year. Let's not sugarcoat anything about it. And, we've now got the federal government, which is pivoting to Europe and trying to, do deals there. We've got pipelines, which may be going forward. We've even got the fabled train, which will crank up between Windsor and Montreal that we've heard about every election campaign, and maybe it's going to happen now. The country is fragile. And the premier, his tone during the earliest days of the Trump administration was smack on. He was very, very aggressive. And between then and this press conference, and maybe even the announcement on the Resilience Bank, I mean, he's been off. As I said this last week, it's been very, very choppy. It hasn't been focused, and it's been brand damaging to him because of that. I mean, it's all about, it's been about radar and bike lanes, pedestrian retail things. This is when the premier shines. This is his platform. This is him being fair and reasonable. That great phrase that Dave Johnson used to use many, many years ago and coined during strikes and everything else. When the premier is fair and reasonable, when he has some empathy for individuals, their families, where they are, I think that changes the tone of the province, because we're moving into a year where all kinds of things that have happened this year are now going to suddenly start to impact next year. And he's going to have to rise to that in a very different tone than he did in the first part of this year.
Well, Kathleen, for all of the thinking that, the booze thing was symbolic, just as the travel was symbolic, it was interesting to see, yesterday, the Trump administration coming up with their list of must-haves in the Kuzma review, and, lifting the ban on U.S. liquor right across various jurisdictions in Canada is among those things. And, they also, they also added, market access for U.S. dairy.
That's supply management, right?
Yep. And they talked about the unfair treatment of electrical power distribution providers in Montana by Alberta, procurement measures in Ontario, BC, Quebec. What else? Regulatory imbalances with Canadian fishers in the gray zone, they're calling it, near New Brunswick and Maine. So for all of the conversation that nothing's been going on the trade front, there's been a lot going on for them to come up with that list yesterday.
Well, there's been a lot going on, and what is not being said is flat out, point blank, we're ripping up Kuzma. So,
right.
From my perspective, whatever that list is, those are things that you would expect to be on the list. They're always on the list, some of them. But the fact that there's a list, Dave, means that there may actually be a negotiation. We may actually continue to have some form of a free trade agreement. And for me, that's the bottom line, that the message that's coming out of the States at the end of the year is not, it's over, we're just ripping it up. That's what I was worried about. And so I think we should take some heart from what we're seeing right now. And the fact that Carney is saying, that you are not going to rip up Kuzma, he has obviously been in close communication, or the officials have been in close communication. There is a conversation going on. I think that is a good news story for the end of the year.
Yeah, I took it the same way, Tim. But and I begin to wonder with all of the breathless reporting that's going on, and all due respect to the folks in the Ottawa press gallery, but it seems as though they find a way to turn this into a bad news story, no matter how you read it.
Not for Tim. He's the optimist, remember?
Yeah, no, I hear you. I'm with you here, pal. I'm on that train right now.
Yeah, all right. Welcome aboard. Private healthcare choice, and now optimism on the Americans. Although I'm not with John Wright on the booze stuff, but I don't have to debate that much more. Yeah, look, I mean, it is helpful to actually see, what the price of the deal may include. And I've been optimistic from the beginning because I think there are trade-offs that, by the way, I think would benefit Canadians too, ultimately, in securing access to the American market and being inside the tariff wall compared to our, competing nations that accepted much higher levels of tariffs. Part of that was going to be doing more in defense. Part of that, I think, was a stronger immigration policy, across North America, and then trade-offs on irritants. I think at the high level, the tech giants do have a very strong relationship with the Trump administration now. The DST was knocked off. That was on my list back in the day. So I think you'll see more around protections for them. The supply management, right? There is an argument that can be made that when we, with strict markets, that means that the costs of dairy, chicken, turkey, like poultry, those that are supply managed, have an unequal burden on lower income families and drive up the cost of the grocery bill. Telecommunications as well, a protected area that, middle class cost pressure. So I will remain an optimist, but it is good to see what some of the prices of emission are going to be. And I do think some of them will ultimately benefit Canadians as well.
Well, it's the supply management issue, and we'll get into the debate as to whether or not it's good policy or good politics across the country. But you can say the same thing about the Online News Act. I mean, that was government getting in its own way. The CRTC just bulldozing local news. So for me, I'm all for waving the flag and saying get rid of that as well. But my point being that there are things on this list that wouldn't necessarily be as painful as we should otherwise think.
No, but some are, and lobster's one. Okay, hands off our lobster.
So supply management. Talk to Quebec.
Exactly. I happen to live next door to a dairy farm, but supply management is something that is crucial to a lot of farmers. But the way it's been set up and the way it's administered at this point in time, maybe it does need changing. I know the Trump himself likes to talk about that. I think it's like 438% tariff that gets slapped on a certain dairy. They've never come anywhere near reaching that amount coming into Canada, so it's never going to. It's never been imposed. If these are things that can be dealt with without completely dismantling supply management, good. But the Premier Wynne's right. It's Quebec that's going to be your major issue on that one. But Trump is clearly coming after it. I think, as I say, the lobster's important, but I think as well, we know we want to open up our liquor stores to American booze. I mean, we can't get bourbon, for goodness sakes. And I know Tim isn't the only person adversely affected by this. It is a real
adversely. Oh my!
Sorry.
Another thing to put on the table, though, Keith, is as well, and Tim, I'm with you. You won't forget that I did send an idea that we should sell it off and give the money to charity on that, but. I mean, the big question in all of this is the guy who occupies the White House, right? Like all this may signal a whole bunch of things to us, but you can't trust what you hear. You don't know where you're going to be. And I think, again, I think all of us have to take stock that all of this could change. I mean, inflation in the United States is down. I mean, the numbers are out. It's at 2.7%. It didn't go down necessarily for certain core inflation pieces. But the president makes a speech one night touting his economic policies, and the next morning when the numbers come out, he goes, see, everything is working. So, yes, he's picking pieces of it, and core inflation had some upswing in some of the commodities there, and, Americans are still hurting. But I think that we're nowhere close to having any assurance that they won't just let the clock run out on the trade agreement that we have, and that this could all go, literally really south very quickly if the president just decides one morning that he's going to, do something very, very differently.
Well, the new national security protocol describes us as a
Exactly.
vassal state. Like that we're just something for the taking at this point if we don't go along with exactly what they want.
Yep.
So whether we're willing to get, cave in a whole lot of areas to get a Kuzma renegotiated, it might not make any difference in the end anyway, depending on what the man in orange decides.
The tone in all of this, though, Tim, has been Canadians just generally are preferring the slow and steady because we're seeing some kind of we're holding our ground vis-a-vis the Prime Minister's approach to this. And if this is any indication, then clearly there have been conversations going on at a regular, serious level, and that's one thing. But as we move into January, the Conservatives are going to have to figure out how they're going to balance that off and actually create a credible opposition to that. And based on what I saw in the media over the weekend, interviews with Rosemary Barton and Vashi Kapelos, Pierre Poilievre just doesn't seem to understand what he's up against. And I think the one point was it might have been the worst performance by a political leader when he answered this question.
Is this a problem of your leadership at this point?
No, it's a problem of Mark Carney's leadership that after Canadians clearly rejected a costly Liberal majority because they knew it would mean higher grocery prices and higher food costs, he is trying to manipulate his way through backroom deals to get that majority.
He's allowed to do this, though, right? Floor crossing is allowed. You've benefited from it.
But he's trying to take a costly majority that would drive up the cost of living and enrich Liberal elites, of course, but not through democratic means. My message to Mark Carney is that if you want a costly majority government to drive up taxes and deficits, then you have to go to the Canadian people and have them vote for it, not do it by dirty backroom deals.
And that was just the opening salvo in that exchange with Barton. And again, the question was around the floor crossings, and I think we've debated that to death already, whether or not that was the right thing to do or not. But his tone and his approach to that, he knew what he was getting into with the CBC. I don't understand the posture there at all.
Yeah, I don't know what I would say in that circumstance, right? I mean, his focus and your focus would be at this point in time at securing your leadership. Right. Late January, that's kind of all in, and then you can, pivot from there. I think like talking about caucus stuff is kind of airing dirty laundry. And what do you say? I'm going to do better with my caucus. I just don't know if that's a come to Jesus moment. Maybe I'm wrong.
He couldn't tell Vashi when she said, "Do you get a sense that there's any other problems?" He says, "I have no idea," but I'm paraphrasing.
Yeah, and Tim, don't you think that in a moment like that, you could say something like, "Look, I know I've made mistakes. I know there have been problems, but here's what I'm doing." Like, you got to in some way meet the questioner where she is and then move on, because otherwise you just leave yourself open for her to keep hammering back, which is exactly what happened. I think the way he answered those questions and the way he behaves reflects such a lack of self-reflection and self-awareness that, do I have Poilievre derangement syndrome? I'm maybe a little bit, but I find him incredibly difficult to listen to. I'm not alone in that. And I think that an interview like that just kind of reinforces, like, this guy, he's not even listening to her. He's not even trying to acknowledge that there needed to be change.
He basically admitted he had learned nothing from his personal or party's loss in the last year by just answering questions about procedure and caucus. He's learned nothing from that. Anyone else who lost that big of a lead would, at least you say, have some reflective points. Well, I learned that the electorate is, more concerned about this issue or that, or you could have played it any number of ways, but he didn't. He just went on they're Carney trying to manipulate the system. What? It just seemed ridiculous and offensive that he was not actually listening or answering the questions.
You know what? I was listening this week and I thought former cabinet minister James Moore, who I have a lot of respect for, I like listening to him, said something that was really, I think, cutting on all of this. And he said, what the Conservatives have lost in all of this is the belief that power is derived from a parliamentary majority as opposed to a movement, conservative movement. And you just see what happened to Danielle Smith. I mean, she no sooner gets a deal with Mark Carney on pipelines when they're calling for her head. I mean, he's staring down the barrel of going into a leadership review in the next month, and he's going to have to get as much support as possible. And I think he was as much speaking to his base, who's going to be there. And there, you know, you can talk all you want about the Ottawa bubble and all that sort of stuff. These people have just come from being in Danielle Smith's backyard, and there's a recall out for her. So that is where his head is at. But that's not to diminish exactly what James Morris said and what we've all seen in the numbers, and that is on a head-to-head basis, his popularity, personal popularity, regardless of where the vote would be today, is sitting around between 28 and 35%. Mark Carney's is up around 55%. Like the gap between the adult in the room and just what Premier Wynne just said, you know, I'm tired of hearing from him. I want, you know, a new mantra. But his focus is with, you know, the next 40 days. It's not the next 3 years. I don't know whether he can recover at all from where he is right now, because Carney is showing that for a guy who's never been in politics before, he's pretty good at what he's doing, and he's holding the room at the moment. So I would suspect that February will be the test point for Poilievre to see whether or not A, you've got another person that walks after that convention across, B, whether or not he can get caucus to, you know, buy into everything that he has been. But his focus has got to be, for him personally, the next 30 to 40 days, as opposed to 3 or 4.
Glad that John came to my rescue on that, because I do puzzle over it. But if I try to put myself in his shoes, he's got that to win, you know, solidly, and I think he will. I know when I talk to, you know, friends in the Conservative caucus, they are pro Poilievre, right? They think he's the best horse. Yeah, I wish we had won. They had a significant increase in vote in seats, and I'm not there. You know, Dave, to see to what degree the two defections are ratting, or if, you know, they just weren't in line with Poilievre's leadership. I suspect it's a bit more of status and ego than a general dissatisfaction within the caucus. I think his fate ultimately is going to be tied. Does Prime Minister Carney get a deal with Trump and we move forward stronger? Or does he fail to do so and our economy weakens and costs continue to go up? I think that will be the main determinant. But boy, I think right now, if I were in those shoes, all focus would be on a solid win come late January and then move from there.
But do you do that on the CBC, Tim?
Right.
I probably would go on it.
Sorry? Yeah.
I go with Keith. I'd go with Keith. You to get a fair shot. I'll ask you the tough questions. That's my answer on that one.
Thanks, Tim.
Well, but Tim, the whole question though around, you know, the next 30 or 40 days in terms of the focus being that, isn't that sort of problematic in as much as what we have seen otherwise? There's a short-sightedness about what goes on there. There's a lack of awareness, a lack of self-awareness, or lack of learning from previous experiences, because at the end of the day, the caucus is likely to be the one that's going to pull the rug out from underneath them.
Yeah, but I don't sense people are playing these stories, but I don't sense that there is the kind of caucus revolt or uneasiness like, you know, Joe Clark had to deal with. I just don't sense that happening, Dave. And like he did all right? Like nobody would have expected the scenario where President Trump would rise up and say to make Canada the 51st state and go on the attack. And then, you know, Mark Carney had the resume that connected with a certain group, and John talked about this more, of, you know, Ontarians and Quebecers that moved. Poilievre increased seat count. He increased vote to levels we hadn't seen since the late, you know, 1980s under Mulrooney. Yeah, there's definitely room for improvement. Kathleen talked about this as well. Deb is the same, right? Particularly with women. There is a disconnect. You got to be sharper for the next campaign on that message. But let's not forget, he actually done all right. And I'm not convinced that the defectors are dissatisfied with Pierre. I think that they see riches on the other side and their short-term interest, personally.
All right. Well, we'll watch with interest. We'll load up on the popcorn between now and the review, and we'll see what happens. So that will do it for us for this holiday season. So Merry Christmas to all of you and a Happy New Year. and Kathleen Wynne, John Wright, Keith Leslie, Tim Hudak, and we'll be back in the new year. We'll have to have our own caucus meeting to figure out exactly when we'll be back, but I suspect we'll be back well before the 23rd of March. So you guys all have a great holiday, and thanks for doing this with us.
Merry
Christmas.
All right, that'll do it. Hope you all are having a great time counting down the days here. As I said, a week to go, and a little worried because I feel organized. But other than that, hoping you all have time to kind of chill and get downtime with the family. Just hit the reset button, whatever it is you're going to do over the holidays, but be sure to enjoy it. And thanks for being here. Thanks for being part of the show. And we'll be back in the new year. All the best in 2026. I'm Dave Trafford. It's On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast.
Wait